we are going to spend some time further talking about how to develop your sustained investigation for AP Art. And so some things that I want you to keep in mind as we go throughout this is it's really important to ask questions instead of making statements. And the reason for that is we're going to be thinking about how the creative process works, and our minds, when we make a statement, that's just kind of like a bit of information. When we ask a question, that helps our minds to know that it's time for it to start trying to figure out answers, make connections, and to solve problems. And so that is why it's helpful if you start by asking a question, because overall what you're going to be working on doing is you're asking a question, and then you are developing an answer visually through the work that you create. So you're asking a question in writing, and you are answering the question visually in what you make. And so it's harder for you to respond to that statement or be guided by that statement if it really is just a statement as opposed to a question. You're going to be doing research. And so again, the questions can help you figure out what you're actually researching. So you're asking questions about things that you are interested in, but you don't totally know the answer, or you want to further explore. So some things that you might research, you can look at other artists, explore books on the topic, or watch related videos. And those are just a couple ideas for you. As you do your research, you're going to document it. So you can do that in your sketchbook, visual journal, just whatever way. How do you collect and organize information? So you might create sketches of ideas that you have. You could cut out images that inspire you and relate to your idea. You could practice exploring colors that connect to your ideas, as well as writing down notes of things that come to your mind. So let's look at turning statements into questions. So this is an example of a statement. The result of nature is dependent on humans. Life of organisms on Earth is for us. So that's just telling us information. And so what I want you to think about is how you feel a shift when you hear these questions start to form. So these questions are all built off of this top statement. So possible questions could be, what is the result of nature and human interdependency? How do nature and humans interact to survive? Do nature and humans need each other to survive? Can either exist on their own? So we took this one statement and now have a whole series of questions that can really help to guide research and then really help to more clearly guide what kind of work might be created. Some things to look for when you're working on turning statements into questions are words that signal a question, like what, how, why, who, and which. Obviously, there are other ones because you can see this one I started with do and another question that started with can. So you're not limited to these, but if you're really having trouble turning a statement into a question, this is a good place to start. So once you've come up with your topic, you're going to work on turning that into a question. So pick a topic that's something that you're interested in, curious about, and you want to learn more about. Write down your topic, and then think about how can you turn that topic into questions. So just like I showed you above, I gave you some examples. So another one here could be, I'm interested in textiles and how we use them to express ourselves. That's a statement. I can turn it into a question. How do people use textiles to express themselves? That gives me a more clear focus as to what am I going to research? What am I trying to portray in the work that I create? In step 2, your topic, you're going to take your topic question. It's just there to get you started, but it's not the only question. You're going to be creating a lot of work, and it doesn't all have to come from one question. So a topic question might be more broad, and it might be hard for you to answer that in one work. So we're going to explore in this section how you can potentially break that down. Now, you might be able to skip number 2 depending on how specific and how many questions you already have. But if you're feeling like you're still looking at your question and are just like, I don't know how to address that, I don't know how to work on that in one piece, then that's a signal that maybe you need to work on step 2 and get a little bit more specific. So in yellow, I highlighted parts of my question where I could get more specific. So people, textiles, and express themselves. So I chose people, and now I made this chart of, well, what are people? What are different categories of people? So I came up with women, men, teenagers, and then I could also explore specific cultures, which here I could even decide what cultures do I want to explore and write those out. Textiles. So that's just like an overarching idea for so many things. So I started to write down what are different things that could be considered textiles, like clothing, accessories like scarves and hats, pillows, blankets, wall hangings, carpets, curtains, just overall interior design. Express themselves. What does that mean? So for me, I'm thinking about I started to think about where they might express themselves or to whom they might be expressing themselves. So for work, to their friends, party, thought about costumes, house, apartment, college dorm, bedroom. Okay, so now I've taken one question and gotten a whole bunch more ideas, which can also help guide my research. So what I also put out here for you to see, so this is one section, the written evidence section of the College Board rubric, to see how this whole process really helps support moving you up to a 3, because your evidence, your written evidence shows inquiry. Asking a question is a form of inquiry. And then the more clear your inquiry is, the more it's going to guide your sustained investigation. It's going to guide the work that you create. And then we'll see that visually. So next, on to step 3. How can I take those ideas, so these ideas we did up here, and start to write more questions? The more questions you have, the easier it's going to be for you to brainstorm and research. So here's some more examples. I started to just pull one thing from each one of these categories and turn it into some questions. So I came up with, how do women use clothing to express themselves for work? Why do only some men wear accessories like scarves and hat to express themselves for work? How do the Amish use clothing to express themselves to their friends? So you can see, you can go straight across, but you don't have to, pulling one thing from each category and basically just replaced them in the sentence. So I would pull, how do replace people with women, replace textiles with something from this column, to express themselves, and then I added this to make it more specific. So then you can really, really quickly take this one question idea, by getting more descriptive, have a whole list of additional questions to explore. So I want you to take some time to do that. Then in step 4, you're going to research and document. So now you have a bunch of questions and you need to start to research and figure out, what does that actually look like? So what reference images do you need to help guide your drawing? I recommend that you collect at least 3 to 5. Work on creating sketches. So playing with, how do you arrange the composition? What colors do you want to use and why? What techniques might connect to your work? So an example for my question, why do only some men wear accessories like scarves and hats to express themselves for work? In my above question, I might collect images of men in suits, offices, scarves, and hats. So those are all things I'm thinking about. Where are they working? What are they wearing? What does that look like? I could then move into practicing sketching the men, making sure that I understand proportion, and thinking about where I want to place them and how I want them to interact. I could also spend time exploring what kind of colors and patterns I want to create on the scarf. So since I'm exploring textiles, other things that I might play with and really thinking about my materials in my sketchbook, I might play with paper weaving. So could I weave part of the scarf that I'm bringing into my piece? Can I bring sewing into my work, or fabric collage or embroidery? So that is this part of the rubric right here. So here we're looking more for practice, experimentation, revision, so that we're going to be able to show in your sketchbook. So if in my sketchbook, I am playing with all of these things and showing those process images, we can show that really well. And we'll be able to show how that connects to our writing because we're using our question to really, really guide our research. And then our visual relationship between materials, thinking about, is that evident? That's where I'm starting to think about, okay, what are ways that really connect to these ideas? So since I'm exploring textiles, I started to think about what are processes and materials that we use to create textiles. So weaving is a process to create textiles. And so I could bring in I could do paper weaving. Sewing is part of creating textiles, and I can sew into paper. Fabric is part of that, so I could cut out fabric and actually collage that. Just like embroidery is part of textiles, and so I could bring that actual process into my work. And then I'm making this really strong connection between the materials that I'm using and the ideas that I'm working on exploring. So I wanted to give you so this is kind of that whole idea generation process. Just an example of a student's question and some of the work that they created. They didn't go through this exact process, but to give you some more ideas. So their question is, what is Southern identity? And so here we can see these thumbnails where they went in, let me make this a little bit bigger, where they went in and were really exploring what do different compositions look like. They were naming different like important parts in the South or things that they felt like were symbolic to the South to really just start to generate a lot of ideas around this question of what is Southern identity. Then here we can see playing in the sketchbook of really thinking about what are different materials, pulling images from the South, playing with color palettes, and really thinking about how that all works together. Here we're seeing a whole different approach, but same idea of what does identity look like in the South. This student really started to think about racism in the South, so exploring what does that mean? What are things that represent racism? What are things that represent slavery throughout? What are color palettes that represent that? Bringing this all together on one page. Here we're seeing some of those ideas show up in a more finished piece. This is another, you can see a real strong connection between this research and then this piece of what stories they're telling, how we're moving throughout. This is another research page. And those are all of the pages. So the main thing that I want you to think about is going through this process to get really clear questions. The more questions that you have to choose from and the more clear your questions are, the easier that your research and documentation is going to be.